Alright guys, it's Chatterbox Reviews, coming to you guys with my review for the 2018 miniseries Waco and its recent follow-up, Waco, The Aftermath. Alright, so obviously I'm a few years late to this mini-series here, Waco, that premiered in 2018, and just kind of missed it. I knew about it at the time. A lot of other great miniseries that came out that year. I believe that was The Looming Tower, the assassination of Gianni Versace, that American Crime Story season there, and then, of course, Escape of Dannemora towards the end of 2018. So I think this one just kind of, missed my, of course, like I said, I knew about it, I just didn't actually watch it at the time, and so this is the first time I have actually watched through the whole miniseries. Of course, I've seen, like, clips and kind of a lot of things about it, but I never had actually watched the whole thing from beginning to end. And I thought this would be a great time to do a review for it, because Waco, The Aftermath, which is kind of a companion or a follow-up limited series. I think some of the creators and some have involved have kind of called it a season 2 of sorts for Waco, although it's not officially kind of considered that. It is kind of another mini-series. So Waco, The Aftermath came out a couple months ago now. And so I thought, I'll review, Waco, the original miniseries, and then I'll kind of share my thoughts towards the end of this one on Waco, The Aftermath, which I have also now watched from beginning to end all the way through. So, yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this one. I know, of course, like I said, we're a few years out from when it aired, but if you did watch it at the time, or if you watched it anytime since, love to hear your guys' thoughts on it, of course. And, if you agree or disagree with my thoughts on it. A lot of course, great discussion, coming from the series about the event. There's also another documentary series, I believe, made this year on Netflix about this event as well. So obviously continues to be kind of a source of discussion. But yeah, and if you enjoy this review, please like and consider subscribing to the channel as well. Would really appreciate that. So just kind of light spoilers for the miniseries. I don't think I'm really going to go into too much detail here. Just, few kind of general notes and stuff about the series now watching it. So yeah, just kind of a light spoiler warning there if you haven't seen the series somehow by now, all these years later. But yeah, so this miniseries developed by John Eric Dowdle and Drew Dowdle, aired in 2018, like I said, on Paramount Network, which is really interesting, right? Because this actually came out, I believe, just a few months before Yellowstone came out with season 1, and I watched Yellowstone season 1, the pilot, when it aired, the couple days after it aired, I believe I even covered it on the channel here as well. So, and just to see now where Yellowstone has now gone, becoming this kind of huge cultural phenomenon, really, and it being on Paramount Network. So, kind of interesting that this one kind of was just a couple months ahead of Yellowstone and kind of blowing up Paramount Network, and of course Taylor Sheridan kind of taking over things there, with 1883 and all these kind of spin-offs now of Yellowstone. Also Mayor of Kingstown, another series that he has checked in, or that I did check out in season 1. So yeah, really cool, kind of a little bit of a history there for Paramount Network. But anyways, it dramatizes the lead up to and then the lengthy standoff of the 1993 Waco siege event, where we had the kind of Branch Davidians at the compound, Mount Carmel, and the FBI and ATF that, originally kind of had the assault, and then kind of the ceasefire, and then the standoff that lasted 51 days. And then, of course, the, really brutal and sad end to the whole thing, right, to the whole standoff. At the end. So yeah, it kind of goes through all that, and I do really appreciate that it also does cover not just the standoff, but even then, the standoff really only starts in episode 3 of the 6-episode miniseries here, so it really does emphasize that lead up to, and at this time they do spend quite a bit of time on David Koresh and kind of, giving that little bit of context for what was about to happen. So yeah, for sure. Appreciate that they didn't, just kind of start at the standoff, and they definitely don't. It does take a little bit to get into that for sure. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of kind of my thoughts on the miniseries here is the performances. I mean, I don't know where this miniseries would be without some of these outstanding performances. And when I took a look back at this, I took a look at what it received in terms of Emmys, right? The only one that I believe they got some kind of technical stuff with sound, sound editing and that kind of thing, which the sound was actually pretty good. The score is also pretty good for the miniseries, but the really only main one that they got was John Leguizamo for supporting actor, and it's like, what? Like, he was great, don't get me wrong, and I'm about to mention how great he was, but there were so many others here in this cast that easily could have deserved nominations there. And I remember that Emmys too, and now looking back at it, I don't know, some of those nominations I would definitely change with some of the names here that I'm about to mention. So obviously Taylor Kitsch is a standout, playing David Koresh. It's one of those big kind of roles where you're playing this real life, kind of larger than life, if you will. Not necessarily meaning that in a positive way, of course, but larger than life kind of character, or than a real person. And what a lot of people consider him to be, a cult leader, right? So he's one of those characters where you have a lot to work with, and you're kind of playing this up, and he does such a great job in this miniseries. I know him mainly from True Detective Season 2, and I think he's great in that. I haven't seen him in many other things, but he really does kind of embody David Koresh. And if you look at the few little interviews and clips of him, as I did, he does really capture the kind of high-pitched voice as well, and just the pace at which he talks. I think he does such a great job. And like I'm about to say too, and I'll get to this when I talk more about the writing and kind of what I really liked, how they handled David Koresh, Taylor Kitsch's performance really makes that work. And I guess I'll get to that, I'll wait. But it's just kind of that human element of David Koresh that they, kind of emphasize, or at least, convey in some way in the series, and I think that's really helped by Taylor Kitsch's performance here. So obviously Michael Shannon is great too. He even has a couple scenes here where you don't always see that from him. He just gives kind of a great level-headed performance, but those few scenes where he does kind of have these outbursts or these emotional moments, that kind of thing, he is so great in that, and I really like Michael Shannon. I still really think you should have got an Academy nomination or an Oscar for Shape of Water. Absolutely great performance in that film, and obviously he's gotten other nominations before that, so it's not like he was needing it or anything. But I think he's such a great actor, and he's great here. John Leguizamo, like I said, the only one to receive an Emmy nomination for the series. And let's be honest here, he really is only in like 2 episodes. He doesn't have a ton of screen time compared to these other cast members here. But he is great. Specifically in that one episode, I think it's episode 2, he's just amazing in it. I mean, he just really showcases that kind of feeling of he's a complete outsider. He's supposed to be doing surveillance, and the way that David Koresh is able to get him to kind of buy in. Of course, he's not fully committed to the Branch Davidians. He doesn't move into the compound with them, but he does develop this kind of sympathy for them, or kind of feel empathetic towards them and their cause. And he also tries to call it off, right? He tries to call off the whole assault in the beginning, or the raid to begin with. And so I think he just plays that really, really well. Paul Sparks, I thought was great too, playing Steve, kind of David Koresh's right-hand man, right, or lieutenant, or whatever they refer to him as. And I haven't seen him in much. I know he's been in Boardwalk Empire, a big role in that, and I thought he was great. Julia Garner is also really great in this. I thought she was definitely a standout. Her and Melissa Benoit, were the two kind of female, leads, or I guess, supporting characters here that really stood out to me. And Julia Garner, this was just after season 1 of Ozark, right? So she was just kind of on the map, and then she won like 3 Emmy Awards for the 3 seasons of Ozark after this. And she was great in season 1 too, even though she didn't win. So really great to see both of them. And Andrea Riseborough, who's now Oscar nominated as well, she was good too, for sure. And then the one I really want to mention here is Rory Culkin. I thought he was amazing in this role as David Thibodeau, which the miniseries is based off the book that he wrote, as well as the book written by Gary Nesner, who's played by Michael Shannon. So obviously, and I'll talk about this a little bit, they do get more, I would say, of a sympathetic, way that they're covered in the series. They do get a bit of a, sympathetic portrayal, while compared to some of the other characters. Because, yeah, they're adapting their books. They probably had to get the rights from them, so they're not going to drag them through the mud. But Rory Culkin just does such a good job at this, a bit of a difficult character. Again, somewhat similar to John Leguizamo's portrayal here too, is this outsider who kind of gets brought in by David Koresh, and kind of, in this case, he actually does move into the compound and does get kind of more, attached or connected to the group and what they are all about and their teachings and everything. And I just think he does such a good job, especially his scenes with Julia Garner and the way that he ends up basically caring for her are just really kind of emotional, especially towards the end. So he did a really great job in this as well. So, and now I want to get to the writing a little bit. So, I praise the performances. I think a lot of them are really great. And, of course, a lot of them deserve probably Emmys. I'm really surprised that Taylor Kitsch didn't get one, to be honest, for playing such a kind of, like I said, larger-than-life character. But I think they really elevate the writing here, because a lot of the writing in the series is really on the nose. The writers really rely on this kind of heavy-handed, even exposition, I would say, throughout the series. There's a lot of kind of telling instead of showing, which I'm not a huge fan of. It's obviously just objectively, it's that quality isn't isn't quite there when you're just having exposition and having characters say things, right? And it even gets to the point where there are certain characters, especially the one played by Eric Lang, who's this radio broadcaster guy, who I believe was based off of a real person, a real radio station. But that one is a good example, but there's other examples too where they basically serve as avenues for the writers to convey their message about what's going on in the story, or during the standoff, right? It's them kind of, the writers basically saying, this is what we think, or this is what we kind of want to get across with the series and how we're depicting these events, and we're just going to have one of these characters say it for us, right? It doesn't really serve the story for this guy to be there. I mean, they could have done the whole series without Eric Lang's character, but he is kind of that voice that is, it's essentially the writers, John Eric Dowdle and Drew Dowdle, what their message is for this series, right? And them trying to kind of convey that through Eric Lang's character and other characters too. Shea Wingham, I didn't mention him, but I think he does a great job too. Glenn Fleshler as well, another FBI agent there. Shea Wingham, I think he does, a good job. He gives a good performance, but there are times too where he's used as kind of a device to kind of just tell us what the FBI was thinking. He kind of just embodies a lot of the FBI kind of this tough guy trope, right? That he's trying to get things done. He doesn't have a lot of time for feelings or being empathetic towards the Branch Davidians, and so that's kind of, you get that a lot with a lot of these characters. A lot of the scenes are just kind of a little too melodramatic and just trying to, again, serve this purpose of saying, okay, this is what we kind of thought of the events and this is what we want to get across. But instead of showing you, we're just going to have a character say it. So, anyways, that was a little bit frustrating to me. But like I said, I think the performances really elevate it to the point where it still is, really riveting. It really, does get you into the story and kind of keep you hooked in there and all that stuff too. So, yeah, I think thanks to the performances, that kind of weak writing at times is elevated a little bit. I do want to talk about the direction too, because I thought there was some great overall direction in the assault sequences, specifically the one in episode 3, right, with the initial assault by the ATF when they show up and, they say the Branch Davidians fired on them first, and so then they return fire, and it's just such a chaotic sequence. I think it's maybe about 10 minutes in the show, or maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 15. But it just felt like they didn't over dramatize the events. It wasn't like this slow-mo action and, people getting, there was a little bit of that, right? People getting shot and going down and this, but it really felt like they opted for a more realistic portrayal of what that would be like. Like, it really felt chaotic. It was all of a sudden they said, shots fired or whatever, and then all of a sudden this just chaotic scene broke out. We had, women, like moms, just grabbing guns and firing them through the window. And even when we saw, people get shot and killed, it was just this very matter-of-fact way of showing it. Like I said, there was no, slow motion, them screaming out for help and bleeding out kind of thing. It was very just matter-of-fact and to me, probably more realistic of what that would be like. And like I said, just chaotic. It was like all of a sudden they showed up and shots fired and then it just broke out. And so without that kind of, like I said, they could have went for a bit more of a lead up and, this tense kind of thing. And it really wasn't that, because in real life, it probably wasn't either. It was just chaos that ensued very, very quickly when the ATF showed up. And of course, you could argue that that was kind of their plan all along. And I think, they show, especially in Waco, the aftermath too, in the court case that they cover, a lot of things pointed to, the ATF wanting that to happen, basically, and them wanting to go in quickly, do this assault, get it over with. There was really no plan of, firing back, a crossfire, and all this stuff that ensued, of course. That was never their plan. So, but I just wanted to say I thought there was great direction there. And also in the last episode, too, when they do, portray the events that happened there on the last day, day 51, when the compound eventually, went up in flames. They go to tear gas the people inside to get them to come out. So there was some great direction there, too, in some of those sequences. Obviously great, that they built the set, or at least it appeared like that, and then they had the tanks go in it. It all just looked really real, really, really great stuff. And yeah, the budget, they definitely did not spare anything there. I think it looked really great too. So to me, the best aspect of this series, though, with everything being said, is how they handled David Koresh. And so I said I'd come back to this with Taylor Kitsch and his performance. I think they do a great job of humanizing him, where they could have, and they do with some characters as well, like Glenn Fleshler's FBI agent character is almost to the point of like twirling mustache villain, right? He is, there's not very much nuance to him. But they could have done the same with David Koresh very easily, right? And I think they actually got a lot of criticism at the time the miniseries came out for the way that they portrayed David Koresh. But they could have portrayed him as this crazy cult leader and all this stuff. But the way that they're able to humanize him here, and it also, it works to basically explain why, over 100 people living in this compound and more as well, listened to him and followed him and trusted him, right? Throughout this whole process and even in, the time leading up to, when the ATF arrives. So by humanizing him and not just making him out to be this crazy cult leader and whatever, they really kind of do a great job of explaining that and kind of providing reasoning why everybody would follow him like this. And, of course, this is thanks to Taylor Kitsch's performance, because the way that he's able to kind of get empathy from you, I think, through this portrayal and through these kind of humanized elements, I think he just does a fantastic job. But then he also does a fantastic job when they're doing the darker side of David Koresh, which is, him taking multiple wives, of course, molesting children or rape, right? Statutory rape of young girls, very controlling, kind of this narcissistic personality, right? And a lot of these things kind of justified through religion, and even many in the compound, including the parents of these young girls, were on board with it because of kind of the religious beliefs and all that stuff. So obviously there's a lot of context for what happened, and for his actions and that kind of thing, but they do show that side to him as well. And so I think by showing both sides of him, they just add such nuance to that character, where, like I said, they could have easily just done this, the kind of trope of like this, like I said, crazy cult leader who's just off, and it's just this like crazy crazy band of all these extreme religious people. But it wasn't really that, right? Like, a lot of these people were innocent civilians who got into this religious sect, even probably many brainwashed by David Koresh and their beliefs, and they kind of got roped into it. Well, how did they get roped into it? Well, they get roped into it because David Koresh was not just evil. He did have some really, he was kind of a good person to a lot of people and helped them as well. So he did some good, but obviously they do cover the darker sides of him as well. And of course, we probably won't know the full truth of what all he did. Maybe he did a lot worse than the allegations are saying. And so, yeah, we won't know probably the full extent. Of course, I'm sure David Thibodeau in that book goes into it, and that's kind of what they're trying to adapt in the series too. But anyways, gotta give a lot of credit to Taylor Kitsch, for taking this role for sure, and of course, the writers here for giving a bit of nuance to that character, which also, again, makes it a little bit more of an intriguing series, right? Because David Koresh, in a way, is like almost our main character, right? It's him and Gary Nesner, Michael Shannon and him kind of back and forth, and if it was just an evil cult leader, yeah, that maybe wouldn't have been as intriguing either. So that is another maybe, kind of explanation for that too. But yeah, no, I don't think they deserve the criticism at all that they got in, the way that they portrayed David Koresh. I think it's really effective. I think they did a great job with that. So the core message of the series, kind of what I took away from it then at the very end, which it's, like I said, not hard to find the core message, because if you just listen to some of the dialogue that's voiced by some of these characters, you'll figure it out pretty easily. But anyways, so the core message of the series, I think, is what, the Dowdle brothers are trying to get across, is that while the Branch Davidians and David Koresh himself, they lived a very different way of life, right? Believed in a lot of these kind of religious principles that are very different from the majority of Americans, and they were not perfectly innocent. Right? I think at the end of the day, that's what the series is trying to get across. Like, there were, good people, right? Innocent people, but they weren't completely innocent, right? In that way, some of them going along with condoning, statutory rape and these things that were going on in the compound. So they're not perfectly innocent. But having said that, the FBI and ATF, or just kind of this government, federal government in general, demonstrated this gross abuse of power against their own American citizens. So it's kind of like this both can be true, right? And I think that's what the series is trying to get across. And I listened to an interview with the Dowdle brothers as well about it. And they said every piece of media before this miniseries was either, fully against the government, right? Or fully against the Branch Davidians. There was really no middle ground. And so that's what they tried to get across with this miniseries. And I think they did that pretty effectively with how, obvious they made this message, right? Is that, yeah, the Branch Davidians weren't completely innocent, but at the same time, the government grossly abused their power against them, and it resulted in the death of dozens of innocent people, including 25 children, right? And at the end of the day, there's just really no way to justify why 25 children would in any way be responsible or culpable for anything that was going on, in the compound, or by the Branch Davidians, right? And they died, right? So that's really tough to justify. And so I think that's kind of the message here, is that at the end of the day, innocent people died, right? And that was at the hands of the government and that abuse of power. So yeah, I think that's kind of the overall message for this one. And to me as well, kind of looking into this more, and even, the series kind of makes this clear as well. John Leguizamo's character, I think in the first couple episodes, kind of voices this, is that the worst part of this whole event is that it could have all been avoided, or almost, completely avoided. Even John Leguizamo's character, I think, voices in one of the episodes, and he says, David Koresh went jogging on this road outside the compound every morning, and they knew that because of the surveillance. And they could have easily picked him up on the road, or tried to get him away from the compound, pick him up, and even then, even if they didn't do that, they had this kind of the search warrant. They could have went to the door, knocked on the door. I guess that, whether you believe that the Ranch Davidians fired first, it in the series, it does not, agree with that take at all. I think it really, it does portray that, that the FBI and the ATF did fire first as a result of, them killing the dogs, right, that were there. That's at least the way the series portrays it, right? And even then, right, if they have this warrant, they maybe could have just tried doing it peacefully instead of kind of coming all these guns drawn. And so, yeah, it's just so sad that, a lot of it could have been avoided, not to mention all the time spent and all of the stress and anxiety involved with 51 days of a standoff. Yeah, it's just really, really unfortunate. And of course, yeah, the Branch Davidians could have come out during that time too, and that would have been easier. But if you just started the very beginning of it, it all could have been avoided with them either just picking up David Koresh or executing the search warrant differently. So yeah, really, really unfortunate there. And I think the series obviously does kind of voice that as well, that it could have all been avoided. So anyways, that'll just about do it then for my thoughts on the Waco miniseries. Now I'll just quickly share kind of my thoughts on Waco: The Aftermath. So then in terms of Waco: The Aftermath, a companion kind of miniseries, or I guess some are calling it season 2 of Waco, I was pretty disappointed by this one, I have to say. Although I did kind of know what to expect going in, I did hear some of the reviews, and I did look at, some of the ratings weren't very high for this miniseries, and I really didn't hear a lot of buzz. Like, it came out a couple months ago, and I barely heard about this. Now, granted, I did not watch the original miniseries, so it probably wasn't on my radar, but I barely heard about this, and of course, usually that's not a good sign, right, in terms of, TV shows and movies. You don't hear much, usually that's pretty bad. But anyways, so it was pretty disappointing overall to me. The writing is even more heavy-handed in this series, and it really stretches the facts. I mean, really, really stretches them. Even, in some points, it's almost complete fiction, really. I mean, it's based off, again, David Thibodeau's book, and that's the only thing it's based off of, which doesn't really help explain many of the events in the miniseries. So I think they're really going off of, obviously, news articles, that kind of thing, to fill in the gaps of all the rest of it. But some of these scenes are just so unrealistic, and if you look up some of the facts of what they're trying to depict, it's all over the place. I mean, Gary Nesner, Michael Shannon comes back for the series, which, yeah, it's great to see Michael Shannon again, but there's just like no point of him being there. I mean, in real life, he was not there. Almost none of the things he does in this miniseries happened in real life. Like, he was not involved in any of these types of cases. He was involved in kind of, I guess a couple of the negotiations that are depicted early on, and then kind of just the general, like, interest in these kind of militia groups and the rise of, white supremacy and the responses from these groups to Waco. But he was not directly involved in any of the stuff that they depict in the series. The court case was also very, really stretched the facts on a lot of the stuff there. It was kind of really reductive in a lot of the stuff that went on there. So, yeah, I don't really understand what the point of bringing back Michael Shannon, Gary Nesner. A lot of this just felt kind of like out of place, a lot of these things. And that's the other thing, is it just felt very disjointed overall. Like, there was just too many different directions for one single series. And I think it could have been 3 different miniseries instead that all could have worked pretty well. So one kind of, I guess, so these are the 3 paths that this miniseries follows, right? It's kind of the Koresh origin, right? So how he came to, found the Mount Carmel compound, how he kind of had this, battle for power, battle to become the leader of the Branch Davidians. And a lot of this stuff, if you look it up, does seem to match the facts. So I think a lot of this stuff, of course, there's some exceptions, but this, I think, was actually the truest to what the real story was. So there's that kind of thing. So yeah, it's kind of a prequel of sorts, I guess, for David Koresh and the Branch Davidians leading up to the Waco siege, the events of the miniseries, or the original miniseries, right? And then the other path is the, Davidians trial, right? So the big trial that happens, and I think that easily could have been the main focal point and like pretty much the only focal point for a 5 or 6 episode miniseries. I think there's definitely enough there. And then the other kind of path is the story behind the Oklahoma City bombing, and Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. They are in this as well, and kind of showing how Waco and Ruby Ridge, even, which is also depicted in the Waco miniseries, the original one, how those kind of came to affect or impact, the Oklahoma City bombing, and pretty much inspired, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols and, others possibly involved with doing it, with taking it out. So they kind of had 3 different paths here, which I felt like all could have been their own miniseries. So it just felt like, especially the Oklahoma City bombing path, just never really had time to actually, come full circle. Of course, like, they do show the bombing at the end of the series here, and kind of make that the kind of culmination of everything, the kind of conclusion, if you will, to the miniseries. But it just was like, it never felt really all fleshed out. I mean, the reasonings behind it were just kind of very vague. Whereas if you had 5 or 6 episodes just devoted to the Oklahoma City bombing, I think that would have made for a really great miniseries. And I'm not sure why they didn't just do that. Why they had to kind of squeeze that in along with the trial and then this kind of origin story of David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. So it just felt like, overall, just a weird concept to have this miniseries with all these kind of different, directions and paths that they were following. And then along with that, to kind of stretch these facts into, at sometimes, like I said, like complete fiction almost, and kind of bending it. So yeah, just kind of a messy project overall. And it's unfortunate because they've, it's been 5 years, right? Or about that time since the original miniseries. And so I was, hoping that they could come up with something a little bit, more polished, a little bit more clear in terms of the direction of what they were trying to do. But yeah, it was just kind of an assortment of things that just didn't really come together as well in a single miniseries, right? That's supposed to be this, kind of companion piece. Like I said, I think all 3 could have made for really great miniseries. So having said all that, yeah, the performances are great again in this one. Michael Shannon obviously comes back to play a character that was pretty much not involved in any of the events portrayed in the series. However, he was great, and he did have some really great moments of kind of these kind of outbursts, these emotional moments, and kind of paying off a lot of the things for his character in the original miniseries, which was good, right? Like, it's good from a narrative standpoint of, watching that miniseries, but it just isn't really true to the facts. And for a miniseries that's based off a true story or based off true events, it's a little messy in that way. But anyway, so he was great. And then Giovanni Ribisi, he was a standout for me in this one, playing the defense lawyer for one of the Branch Davidians in the trial. Yeah, he was just really fantastic. Some of the best stuff I've seen from him. I haven't seen him in a lot, but yeah, from the stuff I have seen him in, really, really great. As the defense lawyer here. So I thought he was a standout. John Hogenaker, I also saw him in Dope Sick as well, and he was kind of outshone by Peter Sarsgaard. It was the duo of them and that kind of subplot from Dope Sick. But I thought he was so great in that miniseries. He didn't really get the credit he deserved, and I think he does a great job in this one. So really glad he kind of got kind of that spotlight, if you will, in this miniseries. He gets a lot of screen time, so really great. And of course, he's playing one of the Branch Davidians there that was on trial. And then Kean Johnson, he was great. I think he was in Euphoria. This is the first thing I've seen him in, and he's playing a younger David Koresh. And I think what he absolutely nails is Taylor Kitsch's performance of David Koresh. I think like that was very clear to me that he tried to model it off of that performance rather than trying to match David Koresh or kind of, trying to model off the real person. He was really trying to model it off Taylor Kitsch's, version or performance of him, because he nails the kind of, the high-pitched voice, the way he talks. And, again, maybe that's Taylor Kitsch nailing the real person, so he just nailed what Taylor Kitsch did, and it's kind of this, thing where they're both mastering, the real person. But yeah, I just thought he was really great in this one, young actor, so really looking forward to seeing what he can do next. But yeah, really, really impressed with him. And, again, it's really interesting to see the kind of origin story, and he does a great job in kind of making that character really quite interesting in this one. But again, I would have been cool with seeing that, I'm not sure if that would have been greenlit, but I would have been cool with seeing that kind of origin story play out as its own miniseries as well. Just unfortunate that's kind of jumbled up with all this other stuff in this one, right? So just overall then, it just kind of felt unnecessary, right? But at the same time, it doesn't tarnish the original miniseries at all. To me, it's a very, it's a companion piece. It's very different, especially all these years later. I think it benefits from that because it's, if it was the year after, okay, then you may consider it more as a season 2 and kind of think of them as the same thing. But with all these years past, to me, it was only like a couple days past between me watching these two. But with all these years past, it does really just seem like a companion piece that kind of sits on its own. So to me, it doesn't tarnish the original miniseries at all, which I obviously quite enjoyed, and this one not so much. So anyways, that's what it is. Those are just kind of my thoughts on it. Of course, yeah, there were some great moments, some great payoffs for those characters in the original miniseries. But to me, because it's based off a true story type of deal, it just isn't as compelling in that way. So anyways, I'm looking forward to what the Dowdle brothers here do next, though. I think they really have some great, great skill here. And a lot of these court scenes I thought were really kind of entertaining, really intriguing. So I think, just them tackling a completely fictional story, which I know they have. They've done a few movies as well. But seeing that future work, I think, is also going to be really cool. Really cool to see. So anyways, I'll just do it then for all my thoughts on the Waco miniseries, the original and the companion piece now, Waco, The Aftermath. Love to hear your guys' thoughts, as I said, off the top on either of these miniseries here. But yeah, that'll just about do it. So anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching this one, and we'll see you then in my next review.